you get what you think about, whether you want it or not. And that what manifests is always a perfect indication of what you've had going on vibrationally. So there are two ways to know what's in the process of manifesting. One is to wait till it manifests and check it out. We call that post-manifestational awareness. And the other is to be aware of the way you are feeling. Now, in the beginning, when you're first beginning to get a handle on your emotions, you're not as adept at sensing what's going on. The more you care about being in the vortex, and the more subject after subject you work your way in, then the more sensitivity you'll have, and the more you'll be able to head things off before they blow up. But it is important to notice that no matter what happened, you can get to where you want to be from wherever you are. So if we were standing in your physical shoes, rather than beating the drum of this drama, we would instead just acknowledge that contrast is just something that is there for you to decipher and to choose from, and then decide what you want from there. Your question sort of sounded like, well, if some good things can happen, then that must mean I'm in a pretty good place. So if I'm in a pretty good place, then why could something not wanted happen? And we say, because you have different beliefs about different subjects of your life experience. Okay. And what's manifesting is always the perfect representation of those balance of vibrations. So, well, it's interesting because this is a very common scenario relative to relationships. So if you're exploring contrast and you know what you don't want, which causes you to know what you do want, and you sort of know what you don't want, so you sort of know what you do want, there's not a lot of spread in those vibrations. If you know what you don't want, so you know what you do want, and you don't do anything about lining up with what you do want, so you know what you don't want, and you know what you do want, what happens is that vibrational spread just gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until eventually there's quite a bit of momentum going relative to this. So then what happens is the universe, because there's been a lot of attention and law of attraction begins to respond to it, that creates stronger pulling. So often, without even knowing it, you've created a lot of momentum that you haven't been allowing yourself to line up with. In other words, you're focusing upon the status quo, and the status quo causes you to continue to ask, but you don't do anything about lining up with it. Instead, you focus on the status quo, on what is. And so this momentum has been brewing, and then something in your experience causes you, for whatever reason, to focus in a way that you release resistance. And now you're drawn quickly in to what you've been asking for. So that's the description of what happens. You're quickly drawn into what you've been asking for. So the universe just sort of insists on showing you what you've been asking for. You could have experienced it in a less dramatic, kinder, gentler way for everyone involved if you had known what you don't want, known what you do want, and then lined up with it. Because in lining up with it, then the universe would be giving you smaller, more incremental steps. In other words, then there is not so much shock to the people in your life when you move incrementally as there is when you move suddenly. But the question that we want to put to you is, and this is a big relationship question, the next book that is coming soon, the printer has it and it's in the process of being made ready for you in September, is called The Vortex. It's a book about relationships, but it's called The Vortex, where law of attraction assembles all cooperative components. And so the question that is really worth asking, apparently you were a cooperative component, and another person had been drawn as a cooperative component, but the person who is not in the mix was not a cooperative component to the desire that you held. What we just want to point out to all of you is that when you understand that law of attraction is the assembler of the cooperative components, and you give your attention to whether you are one or not, and you don't worry about who else is or who else isn't, It doesn't matter who is not a cooperative component. It only matters to you if you are. You have to calculate your cooperation between you and you by the way you feel, and that really is the best that you can do. It is our desire that as a result of this conversation that all of you will find this new law-based universal power in lining up with who you really are, lining up with who you have become. So now let's get into that place and be who you are. And now let's consider this person that you don't want to hurt, that you don't want to feel obligated to, that you don't want to have to get rough with to get away from. Let's consider that person from inside the vortex. So now, anytime you turn your attention to anything and know what you don't want, you know what you do want. So you're creating a new, have already created and are continuing to create a new vibrational reality around that. So the source within you sees that person as stable and whole and clearer and more defined than before, and on the brink of a new relationship too, and with the potential of really living happily ever after, of getting into the vortex and realizing that you were not obligated to be together, that there's more for each of you in your individual ways of finding it. So you have an option of getting into the vortex and looking at this new creation through the eyes of Source, or standing out of the vortex and feeling defensiveness. Isn't it an interesting thing what a mix of emotions someone feels when they're so exhilarated about the new? Funny comparison, and off in some ways but so on in others. It's like Jerry and Esther moving into their new bus and feeling sort of obligated to take the other bus too. Esther said, "Oh, bus, you were so good to us." And then she said, "Some other very happy people will come and take you for a ride really soon." Now, we know this is silly, but it's not so far off. In other words, isn't it an interesting thing how you could be all this time creating this bright new future and now be embracing it and feeling guilty that you're leaving the past behind? Isn't that interesting? Like you have some obligation to it, and we say the past fulfilled its purpose by projecting itself into the future. And when you step into the future, which you've got to do, because if you don't keep up with you, you'll be torn apart, you see. This is the thing that we want you to hear. You're not going to another person and leaving that person behind. You're going to the you that you have become, and that's the person that rendezvous with the you that you have become. Can you hear the big difference? And so the old bus might be saying, "But wait, I could be that. I could keep up with the you that you have become." And we say, don't try to work relationships like that. Deal with the relationship between you and you. Maintain that relationship, and who you really are doesn't feel guilty, and who you are doesn't get defensive, and who you really are doesn't get blameful. Who you really are doesn't get out of the vortex and justify why you've gone someplace else. Who you really are revels in what you've become and appreciates who you are, and who you really are looks back even into past relationships and finds only positive aspects in them. So who you really are leaves no one feeling bloodied and left behind. Who you really are uplifts from wherever you are, you see. From in the vortex, you say to someone that you're leaving behind, "I appreciate all that we were together, and I appreciate the expansion that you've provided for me and that hopefully I've provided for you. And with everything I am, I know that life should be good for you because you are worthy of a very good life. And it is the thought I hold always about you." And when you hold anyone in that light from inside the vortex, when they think of you, if they're anywhere near the vicinity, they will be uplifted by their acknowledgement of that which you are, you see. So what did we just say? Let your relationship with the vortex be the dominant relationship that you're attending to, and let law of attraction take care of everything else. And that's what you described to us when you first sat down.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you.
It's a little tricky, isn't it? Because from outside the vortex, you have all of these possibilities, because there's thousands upon thousands of books that have been written about that very subject. When you're outside the vortex, you're just trying to match up all of these components. Well, how did we come together, and what responsibility do we have, and what did you do to me, and what did I do to you, and where did you come from? And you probably got that way because of your mother, and I wonder what her mother was like. And then there was that counselor that we had, and that counselor was wacko, and that counselor didn't know anything that we were talking about, and there are this factor and this factor and this factor, and then these, and you just kill me now. It's just too many moving parts and impossible to sort out, you see. But when your dominant and singular intent is to close the gap between who you are in your physical form and who you have become, when you get into the vortex fully tuned in to all that you are, then from that vantage point, law of attraction lines everything up. In other words, that's the only way stability and clarity will ever come to you. If you're trying to please that one and please that one, there's that what that one thinks, and there's what that one's family thinks, and then there's what your family thinks about that, and then there's what your neighbors think, and then there's what your golf group thinks, and then there's what those people at work think, and then there's that, and that one thinks that way because that one had that experience. In other words, that one got dumped too, and so that one is really mad at you. In other words, you can't sort it out. When you're trying to take into consideration what everybody thinks about where you are, it will just make you crazy. But if what you're considering is your relationship with who you have become and all that you've been asking for, that guidance is clear. You know exactly what to do. So it's not just about what to do about it, it's about how to feel about it. You feel your way into the vortex. And then what to do becomes a very easy thing to do. Because one who is connected to the stream, one who is in the vortex, one who's tuned in, tapped in, turned on, one who's in alignment with who they really are, is more powerful than millions who are not. So imagine following your own bliss, following your own heart, coming into alignment on subject after subject, and then from that in the vortex position, now looking back in appreciation of everyone who helped you along the way, and giving benefit back to them from your in the vortex place, you see. Can only uplift if you've allowed yourself in. People say, Abraham, I think you teach selfishness. This seems like the ultimate selfishness, to go get what you want. And we say, you have no choice but to come into alignment with self. And when you do, you have the energy that creates worlds flowing through you. But if you sacrifice that alignment with self and source for the sake of jumping through some hoop that somebody else has decided is the appropriate thing for you to do, and then you stand outside your vortex in resentment and sacrifice and commitment, we promise you, you will not uplift their world just by being there. You know what we are doing here? We are trolling for light, which represents your question, and allowing, which represents your readiness. So that's the question that you want to ask yourself. What am I doing to myself? Am I holding myself out of the vortex with good reason or not so good reason? There have been some really heavy-duty conversations here today. And many people, we can feel it in your vibration, are saying, I'm not so sure what I've been worried about, because there's a lot bigger, badder things that could go on out there. But it does not matter what happened that's got you out of the vortex. Out of the vortex is out of the vortex, period. It doesn't matter if it was a big reason, like someone killing themselves that you love, or somebody trying to, or being raped or plundered. It doesn't matter what the reason is that you're out of the vortex. The only thing that matters is that you are, you see. And it doesn't matter how long you've been out. It doesn't matter how big the reason is that you got out. Doesn't matter. Out of the vortex is out of the vortex. And in the vortex is in the vortex. And you now know the difference. You now have no more excuses. You now will have no trouble getting into the vortex. And don't be surprised when you get in, it spits you out. And when you get in, it spits you out. And when you get in, it spits you out. Just get back in. Just get back in. Just get back in. Learn step 1, step 2, step 3, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 1, step 2, step 3. That's what the game of life is, you see. It's the we ride. It's the getting back up to speed with who I am. We have enjoyed this interaction immensely.